Hey friends, welcome to the Church Planting Podcast. I'm Greg Nettle and I serve as president of Stadia Church Planting, where we help you start thriving, growing, multiplying churches for the next generation. On this episode of the Church Planting Podcast, we have my good friend, Mr. Chip Freed. Chip is the lead pastor at Garfield Memorial Church in Cleveland, Ohio. Garfield Memorial transitioned from a 200-person homogeneous church upon Chip's arrival in 2004 to a 1,200-person multi-ethnic church in 2 Cleveland campuses, where no one ethnic group comprises more than 52% of the congregation. Very multi-ethnic. Chip serves as the Director of Cohorts for Mosaix and as Director of the Mosaix House of Studies at United Theological Seminary. Chip brings a wealth of pragmatic information. Chip Freed on the Church Planting Podcast. So I'm here with my good friend, Chip Freed, who's a senior pastor in Cleveland, Ohio. And I met Chip when my wife and I, when our family moved into the city of Cleveland about a year ago. And we were just so excited when we heard about this incredibly diverse church, because that's what we were looking for, was diversity for our family to help us become more like Jesus when it comes specifically to the kingdom diversity issue. But one of the things that absolutely delighted us, number one, the church is incredibly diverse. And Chip, we're going to talk a little bit about that. But Chip's a tremendous communicator as well. So not only do we get, the great diversity, great diverse worship, but we get great preaching every weekend and service as well. So, Chip, welcome to the Church Planting Podcast.
So glad to be here, man. I'm glad God orchestrated this friendship. I'm better for it.
Hey, brother. So let's tell us a little bit about your church. Give us some percentages on diversity. How long you've been there? Does it look different now from when you started? Just give us some background.
Yeah, great. Hey, I've only served 2 churches in my whole ministry. The first church I served was in Lorain County, which is just west of Cuyahoga County. It was the oldest historical Black church in Lorain County. And there were only 32 people left. I had kind of in my particular tribe, I'm in the Methodist church. I had been a former CEO in my corporate days. So they were trying to send me to a very large church to be a youth pastor. And I was like, hey, I've been there, done that. I love youth ministry. But I said, hey, as a former CEO, maybe I could be a little more entrepreneurial. Is there a church that's struggling? Well, I didn't know you don't say that to a bishop. So I got punished and they sent us to this church, and my wife and I, 5 years later, the church went from 32 in worship to 400 in worship. We had a separate 501c3 that ministered to 300 kids weekly in poverty in a very low income area in Lorain County. And
I got to stop you there now. Okay, so let me because for those who aren't watching, but just listening, you're a white guy.
Yeah.
Okay, no wait. So they sent you to the oldest, I think you said, Black church in the county. Okay, so did the church? Did they embrace you? Did they receive you well?
No, they did. First off, my wife is African American, and I'm actually the only white son of Dr. Gardner C. Taylor. I was his 5th son in the ministry. Time magazine called Dr. Taylor the dean of the Black church. And when I met him at Princeton, he was way up there on my radar. And he said, you will be my 5th son in the ministry. And God finally decided to send me a white son. So I in some ways, I'm a product of the historical Black church. I came to Christ in the Black church. I was raised in the Methodist church in a very large white suburban church in the Youngstown area, but I was just religious. I became a Christian under the teaching of African American pastors. So I got it. He was in my comfort zone, but the amazing thing was as our church grew, even though we kept, to quote Albert Tate, our friend, Black church propensities, it became 35% non-African American. And that was kind of our journey. And then here at Garfield was the other side of the story, where we were in the kind of white, very upper income suburbs of Cleveland. And there were about 200 folks here. And, 99.9%, Caucasian. And now, we're 1,200 folks here in Cleveland, and no one ethnic group makes up more than 52%. So I feel like I've seen it from both sides.
I'm just floored by that. I don't think I realized that. So how long have you been at Garfield? How many years?
I'm actually in my 19th year. I'll start 19 years in September.
Because now, coming to worship there now, I would go, oh my gosh, this church surely had been this way, forever. Because I would agree, I like when my family comes in, I would go, we feel like the minority as white people in the church. And I think we might be just by a few percentage points, the minority. But you're saying that when you went there, it was completely white.
Yeah, there were 7 African Americans here when I came out of 200. Only 3 of them belonged to the church. And then when I interviewed them, because I had to find out, why are you here? And the 3 that were members were like, hey, we know this is a white church. We belong to African American churches in the inner city of Cleveland. We're too old to drive there anymore. And the 4 that were here that weren't members were like, hey, our kids like the youth group. They go to the school in the area, but we're just camped out until they graduate. So we really had to do a culture change to not be the white church that 7 African Americans.
Okay, so this is really fascinating because you've taken a church of 30-ish to 400 people, but, and did that journey of diversity along the way from really completely African American to mixed. And then you take a church of 200 to 1,200 mega church, and you went in the opposite direction from white to fully diverse. Give us just, man alive. There's lots of listeners out there right now, church planters. This is gold talking to you. So give us some just basic principles. I mean, where do you even begin?
Well, I feel like I got to begin with Peter, gold and silver have I none. But I will say, it really, the culture change, and we teach a lot on this, has to be from inward to outward focus. Too many of our churches operate kind of the dynamics of a club, where we're united around certain principles or, traditions, music, what have you. And, to develop a heart for the folks who don't know Christ, when you reach out in that way and feel like, in our particular polity for our denomination, it says we're not appointed to congregations. We're appointed to congregations and communities. So when I got here, I said, look, that young boy that's down there on a park bench, his parents are not there for him. I have to be his pastor too. So it really was starting to see your community as your mission field, everything. I think, unfortunately, with the Protestant Revolution, one of the things that the babies that got thrown out with the bathwater was the idea of parish. There's a parish, there's people here. And so as we begin to, what I say, cultivate a healthy evangelistic DNA, your immediate surroundings ought to be what your church looks like. I had a guy walk out on me in a teaching down North Carolina because he says, well, how do I know what my demographics are? I said, well, there are actually some services that'll help you with that. But I said, how about you hang out at the local Walmart or Target on a Saturday? Does your church look like that? And he walked out.
Okay. Let's unpack that a minute, because that's a great first step, right? So where Julie and I lived, just up until a year ago, before we moved into the city of Cleveland, if I would have hung out at the local Walmart or Target, it would have been 98% white, a reflection of the county, which is one of the reason we believe Jesus called us to Cleveland. Because when we come up here to Cleveland now, man, when we go to the local Walmart or Target, we're the minority racially now, but it's highly diverse. Latino, African American, white, and so that would just be a great place for church planters and leaders of mega churches, whoever, to just go hang out and just ask the question, does our church reflect the demographics that are here in this Walmart or Target?
Right. And even a bigger picture, Greg, is the Revelation 7:9, the arc of the trajectory of the church. Like, we know where it's going. So yes, reflecting our community, but are we reflecting the kingdom? And in between my 2 little stops oldest historical African-American church, white suburban church in Cleveland. I actually served as a superintendent where I oversaw 80 churches in mid-Ohio that we went down there, and I was the supervising elder for 18,000 Methodists. My wife was the first person of color. So she visited some churches, and the greeters at the door would say, "Are you lost, honey?" We lived in that. But I would also say to them, some of them whose demographics were similar to from where you came from, I said, "Hey, I drove by 2 trailer parks on the way to church today. How many folk from there, feel welcome at your church?" So it's economic diversity. You have couples who are adopting beyond race. You have a lot of, 1 out of 5 marriages right now in our country is interracial. When Terry and I did that in the 80s, and 90% of America were against that. But that needle shifted. So there tends to be more ethnic diversity in neighborhoods than we even realized. We did a study with the Mosaix Network. I think it was out of Duke, where they said that churches tend to be 10 times more segregated than the neighborhoods they reside in, and 20 times more segregated than the nearest public school. So I just think we've kind of looked past this one and given ourselves a pass. And sometimes we're, like I say, the parish, the community is not what it looks like in our churches.
Okay. So, I heard you say a couple of things. One, I just think back to River Tree, where I was in our central campus. It was in the midst of basically an all-white community. But we said, we're going to become multi-ethnic diversity through adoption. And over the years, there are more than 200 families adopted. And so we started seeing that. Socioeconomic is a great question to ask, because every community has different socioeconomic levels. But Chip, you're raised, like you just said, you had background in the African-American church. Now, I never had that, right? I'm on that journey right now, learning as much as I can from people like you and my brothers and sisters of color right now, drinking from a fire hose to learn. Where do you suggest that those of us who are white leaders, where do we start? How do we start learning?
Yeah, who are your mentors? Who's in your friendship circle? We often say, I quote Derwin Gray on this, I give him credit, he gets on the COVID credit, she gives me credit. So I don't know who said it first, but we said it's hard to lead a multi-ethnic church if you don't live a multi-ethnic life. So who are you reading, right? Widen your circle as far as books I'm reading, people I'm connecting with, I think it's and even our personal relationships. The more that you live it, walk it. My experience was I played Division I college basketball. The older I get, the better I used to be. But I was the only white starter in my whole league, and so I found a family back in the 70s when that was unheard of. And I feel like actually the opposite of what we call about privilege. I feel like I was privileged to be invited into a whole different neighborhood and a brotherhood. So usually sports, military, you hear things like, living in that context. But in our country right now, it's not that hard to develop diverse relationships and read diverse people. I went to Colgate University, and Manning Marable, who was Cornell West's mentor, came to Colgate to start a African-American studies program, and I was his first sign up. I just wanted to learn stuff I never learned before. And then when I went to Princeton, I was a graduate assistant for Cornell West. So it's just, rubbing shoulders, finding those ways to connect with people that are different and give you a window into their life, which I believe, and I'm teaching a doctorate on this right now, but the Ephesians 3:19, then we come to know the fullness of God. That we don't see the manifold wisdom of God, which that word manifold in the Greek and multicolored, it's just seeing all the facets of the diamond is what I'm realizing. And you've been, here, there's so many diverse people that they give me a window into an aspect of God, the height, the breadth, the depth, the length, that I might not see if I'm just hanging out and entertaining.
Okay, I've got to pause again because there's so much to unpack in this wisdom that you're giving us. So, first of all, we're talking about intentionality of developing relationships intentionally with people that are different from us, specifically different racially and culturally, ethnically right now. I was challenged very early in my journey. A brother of color said, Greg, I'm going to give you 1 year. And he said, by the end of the year, I want to see that you have 5 friends of color who are peers, not people that you're taking care of or investing in, people that are either leading you or speaking into your life or completely peers in your friends, on your phone, on your iPhone. And, that sounds pretty easy. That is not easy. You have to be really intentional about it, right? So that's a great first challenge, is to just start to say, how can we start developing 5 people of color that are different from me that I can be in relationship with? And then the second thing I heard you saying was just this attitude of approaching this dimension of ministry and kingdom diversity with a posture of learning, right? Not what can I get, but rather what can I learn from people who are different from me, from different racial, because it's like you said, it's a privilege to be invited into that space because we don't have the corner on the market. Let me get real practical here for our viewers and listeners, Chip. Give me 1 or 2 books that you'd go, hey, if you're just starting out on this, maybe these might be great ones to start with.
Yeah, Sun Tam Ra, Korean theologian, The Next Evangelicalism, kind of really is a boat rocker.
Okay, The Next Evangelicalism,
Sun Tam Ra. Derwin Graves written a great one. I'm walking about 45 folks through right now, healing the racial divide, what the early church and the first Christians knew about racial reconciliation. Very, very lay friendly. Of course, my friend Mark DeMoss has written Build a Healthy Multiethnic Church, and that's more kind of 101 for pastors. But I found Derwin's book pretty accessible for lay folk. But Mark is the gold standard on that. So those are 3 books I'd start with: Building a Healthy Multi-Ethnic Church, Mark DeMoss, Healing the Racial Divide, Derwin Gray, and The Next Evangelicalism.
My wife Julie right now, Chip, is reading Derwin Gray's book and absolutely loving it. I haven't read it yet, but she said, "Hey, you need to put this on your reading list." So I'll be excited to do that.
But look at it, Greg. I know you and I are newer friends, etc. Our wives are like they've known each other their whole lives.
Right.
And my wife just can't wait to talk to Julie. And so, Well, how did that happen? It's like, it's not as hard as we make it out to be to develop friendships and relationships that expand our horizons, and, Terry and I, again, when we got together, it was like the scarlet letter, but, you've met us, we were destined for one another. And I feel like the first time I laid eyes on my wife, he had Garfield on his mind.
Yeah. All right. Let me ask you this. So, the last several years, it's just been a nightmare, landmines all over the place for any pastor trying to navigate racial issues in the United States of America these days. What are some, as you're leading a mega church now that's fully diverse, what are some of those landmines, if you will, that we kind of need to watch out for? How did you navigate those areas of tension?
Yeah, I don't know. I've done it real well, but the truth is, I don't think there's been a more important time for this kind of ministry to take place in our country. I don't know that there's been a more difficult time for this kind of ministry to take place. When Jesus came down from the Mount of Transfiguration, what did he say? This kind can only be brought out through prayer. So, this takes a full-blown prayer ministry, and we have an amazing one with our House of Prayer ministry, which you start seeing in the Bible. When Jesus, I used to quote, Jesus walked into the temple and said, "Oh, I thought I'd find a house of prayer, but I have a den of thieves." That's not what he said. He said, "I thought I would find a house of prayer for all nations, for all ethnic." We miss it. We clean it up. So The navigating for us is if we try to own it. You've heard a little of that here. We have 2 rules to join our church. You have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Yeah. When Jesus says, deny yourself, take up your cross and follow me, deny yourself is get rid of your personality. Take up your cross is get rid of your preference. Nobody prefers the cross. And follow me, get off of your past experience and come into new territory I'm going to show you. And the second rule we have is we say the 70% rule. You're going to like 70% of what happens here. And if you're okay with that, come on in. But when you're in your 30%, somebody else is in their 70%. So it creates an attitude of selflessness. I don't, again, I probably flunk that more than most, but we try to say, keep the mission, keep that the main thing. And if you have to have all of your preferences met, we're probably not your church.
Okay, so I want to come back to this saying, and I want you to say it again, because I want everybody to hear it again, and I want to get it right. About the first rule is you got to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Is that what you said?
Yes, be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Okay. And I mean, that's hard for people. That's hard for me. That's hard for all of us. And what might that look like in practical terms in a diverse church?
Yeah, it's that there will be, there will be every, we'll say tongue, tribe, and nation. There will be sometimes it's not your tongue. Like, music is a big one always, because I like, I like a little gospel, or I like a little traditional, or I like Hillsong. Okay, you'll get a taste of that. Rich Viotis is a great writer, young guy out in Queens, if you know him. I laughed because we were together at our Mosaix conference in Dallas, and he mentioned that on Christmas Eve, they tend to represent like 5 or 6 languages on Christmas Eve. And he says, without a question, somebody will come up to him and say, yeah, but you didn't speak my language this week. And Rick says, get in line. It may take 7 years, but we'll get there. And it's kind of that being comfortable, being uncomfortable, that we're really recognizing the glorious diversity of who and what God created. I mean, people think diversity is like this politically correct term or whatever. Look around. I mean, God, he had to love diversity. When you look at the nature and the animal kingdom and us, this is the fingers of the Creator. And so we just try to celebrate that and say, it can't be, and this is a big saying we have, it can't be, we want your color, not your culture. Like we want to celebrate. We want to learn. Heavens, I was just down at a Lunar New Year festival because our outreach and outflow coordinator is Chinese. And so I didn't know there was this huge Chinese community just south of us. And Terry and I went and spent Saturday and just learned, the year of the rabbit, what are we in? And the scriptures say God doesn't leave himself without a witness. And so it's kind of exploration. I just wrote a keynote yesterday, quoted an African-American writer that I respect, Bell Hooks. And she said, if we're going to learn to love, we got to stir up our imagination, man. And that's kind of, I think, what happens here.
Okay, let's talk about, let's say I'm leading a church right now, or I'm getting ready to plant a new church, and I want it to be diverse. I want our church to be diverse. It hasn't been, whatever. Give me time frames. Is this going to happen in 6 months? Is it going to take 10 years? Just give me some wisdom kind of on that.
Yeah, I think the new church plants have an advantage on this because you can fill that into your DNA from the get-go. I was teaching at Exponential a few years ago, and Vince Antonucci and actually happened to be Andy Stanley at a table, and they're like, oh, you transition one? That's too hard. It is. You're swimming with anchors. So in transition, we usually say probably 5 to 7 years. It's a slow burn. But I think planning, I picked up a young man in Ohio when I was teaching at Exponential years ago in Orlando. And the young man said I had to come to Florida to find my coach in Ohio. And I basically told him, you're planning, just have the multi-ethnic in your DNA. It may not happen. That's okay. But as long as it's in your vocabulary, I'm your guy. And he planted, in 16, and he called me and he was crying. And he said, I had 197 folks show up. I'm like, holy cow, that's a great launch. He said, that's not why I'm crying. It was a third. It was Caucasian, Hispanic, and African American. Then I started crying.
Yeah.
It just having it in our DNA, having it like we believe that when Jesus said, go out into the world and make disciples of all ethne, that was the word that he was serious. And I really do think when we have that outward focus, again, you said a key word, Greg, intentionality. It takes intentionality. And I get so frustrated when people get mad, like, oh, it's political correctness, whatever. I'm like, heavens, you're intentional about everything. You don't show up on Sunday and just say, oh, let's wing it, right? Or your children's ministry, just wing it. But when it comes to diversity, if you're intentional, then you're manufacturing something. Well, heavens, we're manufacturing all the time. We hear about this gospel and we're being intentional about it. So having some intentionality, again, when people of color started visiting this church, which was a very highfalutin suburban mainline church, which, I would come, and I had the Partridge Family on stage. I'd have to come off the stage and say, to an African-American, hey, man, we're not what we want to be yet, but boy, you could help us get there. Just owning. We're so afraid, I think, sometimes to say we're not what we want to be yet. And to own that and talk to people in that way, people really are open.
Okay, so Chip, I'm just going to own that right now. When it comes to kingdom diversity, I am not who I want to be yet, man, but I am having a ball on the journey, and I'm grateful to learn from people like you. So you mentioned something just kind of in passing that I want to call back to. You said you were coaching someone. Okay, so if there are leaders out there, because I've had numerous coaches on this journey, and these days, I have like lots of people. I can call you, I can call Courtney Wright, I can call Albert Tate. I've got all these people in my life now. We've got friends of color now that I can ask just questions about. Let's talk about this lifestyle difference, maybe between how your experience of life in this community and my experience of life. So where do we get where can you encourage people if they want to get a coach or get coaching on this?
Yeah, I would suggest going to Mosaix.info at the Mosaix Global Network. I think Mark DeMoss has done a great job. People say to me, how did I become a Mosaix? How did I find them? I said, they came and found me because they were on a surge nationally to find out who's doing this, because we've just kind of left the pioneer stage of the movement and moved into the early adopter. So Mosaix.info is a great place to start. And I think Stadia, which you've created, Greg, my heavens. I mean, I was with you at Exponential last year and Daniel Yang and Albert Tate, and you were saying that Stadia wants to represent this. So I think those are two great resources. I mean, folks can contact me. Chip at GarfieldChurch.org. I love to work with young pastors. I just love it. I feel like, and you and I become friends, so you're on my speed dial when I need advice. But I always say to myself, I just turned 60. I wish I had me at 30 when I was in ministry to talk. Yeah. And people say, well, man, you're brilliant. I said, no, it's just mileage, man. Just mileage.
We learn from we learn. Okay. So Mosaix, www.mosaix.info @info. Mosaix.info.
It's .info. Mosaix with an X .info.
Okay.
www.mosaix with an X.info. If you go to our staffing coaching page, I'm on there, and others are as well. I think there's just some of your best practitioners who've been living this for a long time.
Yeah, and Stadia's, we've partnered with Mosaix for years. We're becoming deeper partners now. Big fans. If you're looking at planting a church, go to stadiachurchplanting.org. Love for the coaching. Go to mosaix.info. And Chip Freed, I can't thank you enough for the work you're doing. It's great to partner with you.
You as well, my friend. I'm a big fan of Stadia.